How did America gear up for World War II industrially? How did we manage to produce this machine, this industrial machine that won the war? That's what we'll talk about in today's history video. This is all based on a very interesting book that I just finished out this year called Freedom's Forge, F-O-R-G-E, by Arthur Herman. Just a terrific book. And it really explains how the United States acquired this industrial domination in World War II. Before the war, our industries were in terrible shape. Steel, for example, we'd produced 60 million tons of it in 1929, and in 1939, we produced only 30 million. Our armaments industry had completely tanked, a deliberate effort by the pacifists who controlled Congress and wanted to cripple the arms industry. And we really had very little industrial capacity of the sort that we had during the war. And what happened was that it built up over a 2 or 3 year period to this behemoth that dominated the world. To give you an idea, the United States in 1944 produced 100,000 airplanes. That was number one in the world. Number two in the world was Germany at 8,500. That gives you an idea of the unbelievable domination of the war by American materiel. We produced a car for every vehicle for every 2 American soldiers, whereas the Wehrmacht was using horse-drawn transport in 1943 and 44. How did this happen? Well, the left has rewritten history, Herman writes. The left has said that it was central planning, it was the result of the government ordering people to do different things, and really a testament to the effectiveness of a socialist system. And that turns out to be just totally wrong. It's completely rewriting history. John Kenneth Galbraith, who is one of the leading liberal historians and economists, who worked at the Office of Price Management and worked on the process, dismissed the dollar-a-year men, the industrialists, who came to Washington and volunteered their time to win the war, as worth $1 a year. It's a quote of his. But it turns out that that is a complete rewrite of history by the left. What in fact happened was that Harold Ickes and Eleanor Roosevelt and the Henry Wallace, the communist who was vice president, we'll talk about him in a subsequent video, all of them got together and told Roosevelt, we have to win the war, and this is the ideal opportunity for us to show socialism in action. You should mobilize the war industries, appoint a czar who can, one of Obama's czars, and he can allocate material and equipment and transportation and rolling stock as he wishes, and really will be a miracle of production. And Roosevelt said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to rely on private enterprise to do it. And he brought in a guy named Bill Knudson, K-N-U-D-S-O-N. I'm still not sure if he pronounces it Knudson or Knudson, but maybe one of the watchers can inform me about that. He had been the head of Ford Motors along with Henry Ford, and then he moved over to GM and really created Chevrolet and made GM number one in the country. He left his post in 1939, early 1940, and moved to Washington for $1 a year and set about converting the economy. And his concept was total capitalism. Create incentives, give contracts where you'll make money, give workers wages where they'll make money, and let the desire for profit motivate American industry to move ahead, and leave the decisions as to how to do it and who should make what and how they should fit into the system to the individual businessmen themselves. It's too complicated for the government to do it. He pointed out that GM had like 12,000 subcontractors. You couldn't go around telling each one, okay, you used to make drive shafts, now you're going to make a turret for a tank, or you used to make tires, now you're going to make treads. Just too complex. Instead, put a pot of money out there and get them interested in getting a piece of it and setting production targets that you get them to reach. And as a result, war industry profits were very significant during the war, but at the same time, wages rose a real 80% during the war. And all of that produced this gigantic industrial machine. And the book goes through the details of how that happened. Particularly, for example, the difficulty of making a B-29 bomber, which had a wingspan of 300 feet, and the difficulty of converting the automobile industry to making tanks. and all of the challenges of ramping up aluminum production, ramping up magnesium production, all of the stuff that they went through. But the theme that underlies it is that it was the private sector, voluntary initiative, by businessmen and by labor pursuing the goal of profit. By the way, the role of labor unions during the war was outrageous. There were strikes at every venture, every cross, inhibiting rearmament, inhibiting preparedness, and then once the war started, they didn't stop. In 1943, John L. Lewis, the head of the mine workers, announced all 60,000 mine workers were going to go on strike for higher wages, right smack in the middle of the war. And Roosevelt had to threaten to pull the draft deferments of all of the miners and draft them into the army and order them to continue. And Lewis backed down, but only after enormous public anger and outrage at him. But this is a fascinating history. And what really happened was, it's kind of a limited statement to say that the industrial stuff won the war. What it did was it positioned the United States to be the dominant industrial power in the world, because we had this vast capacity. And after the war, a lot of the planners said, oh, we have to scale back now because we'll never have enough people buying all of these products. And if we if we attempt to do it, we're going to have inflation, we're going to have high unemployment, we'll go right back to the days of the Depression. And the American industry said, no way, you let us keep our capacity. We'll keep these factories going and we'll fill it out, making refrigerators and cars and all manner of consumer appliances. And when the soldiers came home, they had huge savings that they'd amassed during the war because he didn't spend anything over there. And as a result, the huge demand flooded the market, and products flooded the market. We had a brief flurry of inflation in late 45 and early 46. But after that, things hummed along normally, and it was the boom of the 40s and the 50s that made the United States the dominant power that it is today, and in the process really created the basis of what the left calls, and Eisenhower called, the military-industrial complex. It's a fascinating read. Freedom's Forge by Arthur Herman. Thanks a lot.